What does it actually mean for a physical object to stop existing? If you track the mathematics and the mass, almost nothing in our universe is ever truly destroyed. It is simply disassembled. The 11th century Persian philosopher Naser Khusraw examined this physical limit in chapter 62 of his text, the Khwan al-Akhawan. He sought to determine if absolute annihilation was even mechanically possible. Khusraw developed a thesis on decay, focusing on the specific concept of fana. To understand his conclusion, we have to look closely at how he defines the process of an object ending. This animated diagram of a composite sphere illustrates Khusraw's definition of fana. Notice how the sphere separates. The object isn't vanishing into a void. Decay is the mandatory separation of a composite entity back into its original foundational parts. Khusraw uses human death as a primary example. Upon death, the dense physical body separates and returns to the earth. Simultaneously, the subtle, non-material soul detaches and returns to its origin. The person, as a composite entity, ceases to be. The materials never vanished. Decay is a mechanical sorting process of composite parts. What we perceive as destruction is the rearrangement of matter. If decay is merely the sorting of parts, this introduces a paradox regarding the universal intellect. In Khusraw's framework, the universal intellect is a singular manifestation of the divine command. It is not a mixed composite. It has no parts to sort. To determine if the universal intellect can be destroyed, Khusraw outlines two strict conditions for decay. In this diagram, we see the first, external dominance. This occurs when a stronger, opposing external force overtakes and consumes a weaker entity. If there is no external predator, destruction requires a second condition, which Khusraw calls istihala, or internal contradiction. Istihala functions strictly as a qualitative transformation. An object breaks down because an inherent flaw or instability exists within its essence. The structure collapses under the weight of its own internal physics. When Khusraw applies these laws of entropy to the universal intellect, he finds neither condition is met. The intellect possesses no opposing external force in creation. Furthermore, because it is a singular, unmixed emanation of the divine command, it harbors no internal structural flaw. Lacking both an external predator and an internal contradiction, the universal intellect cannot undergo fana or istihala. It is ontologically immune to the mechanics of entropy. This immunity leads to a theological paradox regarding omnipotence. The assumption is that if God is truly powerful, he must possess the ability to destroy his greatest creation. Khusraw dismisses this as a categorical error. He argues that the desire to see a perfect system destroyed is rooted in a misunderstanding of what power actually represents. He grounds this in a practical analogy. Imagine a master craftsman who builds a flawless, everlasting water wheel. The demonstration of his mastery is the perpetual operation of the system he engineered. Now compare that master to an unthinking observer who smashes the wheel to pieces. The observer might believe he is demonstrating strength, but destroying a functional system is an act of failure, not design. Because the universal intellect is the ultimate flawless system, Khusraw identifies it as the face of God. He draws on the Quranic principle stating that all things will perish except for this singular face. This face is the anchor of Tawhid, absolute divine unity. The intellect is the exclusive epistemological vehicle through which human beings can recognize this unity in an otherwise chaotic universe. Divine omnipotence is demonstrated through the emanation of a permanent structure. Possessing the arbitrary capability to annihilate your own wisdom would be a logical contradiction, not a sign of power. 2 centuries later, the mystic Jalal al-Din Rumi built upon this same Neoplatonic foundation, shifting the focus from structural mechanics to human psychology. Rumi draws a distinction between the permanent universal intellect and the aqli jazwi, the partial, individual human intellect. Rumi warns that the partial intellect frequently denies higher truths. It operates on fragmented logic, pretending to understand concepts like eternality, while actually being trapped by its own limits. Rumi concludes that the macro universal intellect is the actual origin of reality. Individual human reason is merely a temporary, localized tool used to navigate material existence.
Hey everyone! If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. Your support really means a lot and helps me keep creating content for you all. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Rumi's mystical framework validates Khusraw's model. It suggests that individual human minds must surrender their reliance on partial, breakable logic if they want to grasp the scale of the eternal macro-intellect. This logic finds parallels in classical Western philosophy. Plato and Aristotle arrived at remarkably similar structural conclusions regarding the nature of concepts. Plato's realm of forms asserts that pure concepts exist in a state of perfection. Like Khusraw's intellect, these forms never suffer composite decay because they are entirely unmixed. Aristotle's concept of the active intellect follows a similar path. He defined it as a separate, unmixed entity that guarantees human understanding, one that is immortal by its very definition. When we contrast Khusraw with modern Western thought, the structures diverge. This model maps Khusraw's framework against Baruch Spinoza's concept of monism. Khusraw maintains separation between creator and intellect. Spinoza collapses both into a single substance where God and nature are identical. Kant adds a different hurdle, a strict epistemological boundary where observation is cut off from the things in themselves. The mind bounces back, unable to cross. Khusraw's model bypasses this barrier through his emanationist structure. Because the human intellect is a localized branch of the universal intellect itself, the thing in itself is not a foreign object across a wall, but the very source of the mind's own light. Knowledge is a return to an origin, not a crossing into the unknown. Classical Western thought mirrors Khusraw's structural immortality. Modern Western thought, however, continues to struggle with the divide between the creator, the created, and the limits of human perception. Beyond the Western and Islamic traditions, Khusraw's mechanics can be analyzed alongside the core tenets of Buddhism. Buddhism operates on the concept of anicca, or impermanence. It establishes that all conditioned things are composites, and therefore they must decay. Khusraw and Buddhism align on the fate of composites. However, Buddhism applies this law of decay universally, asserting that even the mind and consciousness are composites destined to break apart. Buddhism rejects the existence of a permanent universal intellect. In the Buddhist framework, only the unconditioned, non-conceptual state of nirvana escapes the gravity of entropy. Taoism provides a different angle. Laozi introduces the concept of the eternal Tao, identifying it as the primordial origin of all things in existence. The Tao shares a function with Khusraw's divine command. Both act as a singular anchor that stabilizes reality and prevents the universe from collapsing into chaos. The contrast lies in how these structures are described. Khusraw's intellect is characterized as a rational, knowable light. The Tao is inherently unnameable and operates beyond the bounds of structured logic. The eternal origin is visualized as structured logic in one tradition and as a formless void in another. Despite these differences, both acknowledge the necessity of an imperishable anchor that sits outside of material corruption. Looking at this matrix, we trace a clear convergence. Islamic Neoplatonism, Western rationalism, and Eastern mysticism independently identified the same physical law regarding the decay of composite things. Khusraw's framework establishes an immunity to universal entropy for the universal intellect. By proving that the intellect lacks both external opposites and internal contradictions, he removes it from the mechanics of destruction. Its permanence is a logical outcome of its singular nature. This returns us to the core theological principle regarding divine omnipotence. God's power is verified by the establishment of an imperishable reality. It is not demonstrated by the capability to destroy his own wisdom. In a universe defined by constant flux and the separation of composites, the universal intellect serves as the permanent face of truth. It reflects a recurring observation across philosophical history, the identification of a single anchor that remains standing when composite reality disassembles.